I'm Kylie, 32, a single mom who finally bought my dream home after years of grinding at my tech job. When my parents lost their house, I opened my doors to them. I never imagined that 8 months later at a family dinner, I prepared my dad would scream in my face that my son Jake and I were freeloaders. The worst part, my mum just sat there smirking in agreement, all while living rent-free in my house. Without hesitation, I calmly responded with words that changed everything. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join my journey of healing. Growing up with my parents was like walking on eggshells every single day. My father, Richard, was the kind of man who needed to control everything in his orbit. From what we ate for dinner to which friends I could invite over, nothing escaped his scrutiny. My mother, Diana, was his silent enabler. She never contradicted him, even when his demands became unreasonable. I remember countless nights hearing her apologize to him for things that weren't even her fault. This dynamic shaped my childhood in ways I'm still unpacking in therapy. By 16, I was working after school at a local grocery store, not because we needed the money, but because I craved independence. My father grudgingly allowed this, only after I convinced him it would look good on college applications. What he didn't know was that I was saving every penny creating my escape fund. College was my ticket out. I applied to universities far enough away that coming home on weekends wouldn't be expected. When I got accepted to a computer science program on a partial scholarship, my father wasn't impressed. He called computer science a fad and insisted I study business instead. I stood my ground for once, and he retaliated by refusing to contribute to my education. So I worked. I took out loans. I applied for every scholarship and grant possible. I graduated with debt, but also with something priceless, the knowledge that I could make it on my own. Shortly after graduation, I met Marcus. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed nothing like my father. We married quickly, perhaps too quickly. By 25, I had a baby boy we named Jake. For a while, things were good. Marcus landed a job at a startup, and I secured a position as a junior software engineer. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. 3 years into our marriage, the cracks began to show. Marcus became increasingly distant, working late hours and traveling frequently. When he was home, he was glued to his phone. I later discovered he had been having an affair with a co-worker for months. The divorce was ugly, but I fought hard for primary custody of Jake, which I won. Single motherhood while building a career in tech wasn't easy. There were nights I cried after putting Jake to bed, wondering if I had made the right choices. But watching my 4-year-old son sleep peacefully made everything worth it. I promised him then that I would create the stable, loving home I never had. Over the next few years, I poured myself into my career, climbing from junior engineer to senior developer at one of the largest tech companies in our city. The hours were long, but the pay was excellent, and the flexibility allowed me to be there for Jake's school events. By the time Jake turned 7, I had saved enough for a substantial down payment on a house. Finding our home was a moment I'll never forget. It was a 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood with excellent schools. Nothing fancy, but solid and well-maintained, with a backyard where Jake could play and a spare bedroom I converted into a home office. When we got the keys, Jake and I danced around the empty living room, our voices echoing off the bare walls. That night we camped on the floor with sleeping bags, making plans for each room. I had been in my house for just over a year when I received the call from my mother. Their voices were the last ones I expected to hear. We hadn't been estranged exactly, but our relationship had cooled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional birthday visit. My mother sounded different that day, her voice small and frightened. My father had lost his job 6 months prior and had been unable to find another position at his age. They had burned through their savings and the bank was foreclosing on their home. I surprised myself with my response. Without hesitation, I offered them my guest bedroom until they could get back on their feet. Perhaps it was a desire to prove I was nothing like my father, or maybe it was simply the right thing to do. Whatever the reason, 2 weeks later, my parents arrived with 4 suitcases and a cloud of defeat hanging over them. Jake was ecstatic to have his grandparents living with us. At 7, he was too young to understand the complicated history I shared with them. To him, it meant cookies after school and someone to watch his favorite cartoons with. My mother seemed genuinely happy to spend time with her grandson, and even my father appeared softer around Jake, showing him how to build model airplanes and telling stories from his Navy days. For the first few weeks, we existed in a bubble of cautious harmony. My parents were grateful, and I was determined to show them I had become a successful, generous adult, despite their lack of support. I gave them the largest guest bedroom with its own bathroom and cleared space in my home office for their belongings that wouldn't fit in storage. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. My mother began rearranging my kitchen cabinets without asking. My father started answering my home phone and making decisions about when the air conditioning should run. Small things really, but the first raindrops of the storm that was coming. The first major conflict erupted about a month after my parents moved in. I came home from work to find Jake in tears. My father had taken away his tablet because he thought Jake had been playing games too long. When I explained that I allowed Jake an hour of screen time after completing his homework, my father scoffed. "That's your problem, Kylie. You're too soft on him. Boys need a firm hand. That's why so many kids these days have no respect for authority." I took a deep breath before responding. "Dad, I appreciate your concern, but Jake is my son and I make the parenting decisions. If you have concerns, please talk to me first before disciplining him." My father stomped off, muttering about modern parenting nonsense. My mother gave me a look that was both apologetic and accusatory, as if I was the one creating problems. That night, I sat Jake down and explained that while Grandpa and Grandma were living with us, they might have different ideas about rules, but ultimately, I was his mum, and he should come to me if he was confused or upset. The fact that I had to have this conversation at all left a knot in my stomach. As weeks turned into months, the tensions grew. My mother took over my kitchen, completely criticizing my cooking as too fancy and complaining about the organic groceries I bought. One evening, I came home excited to make Jake's favorite pasta dish, only to find my mother had already prepared a meatloaf. "I know how busy you are, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought I'd help out." It wasn't really about the food, of course. It was about territory and control, the same dynamics that had dominated my childhood home, now invading the safe space I had created for Jake and myself. My work began to suffer as I found myself distracted by text messages from my mother throughout the day asking where I kept certain items or informing me they had fixed something in the house I hadn't known was broken. My team lead noticed my decreased focus and gently asked if everything was all right at home. I brushed it off, embarrassed to admit I was a 32-year-old professional being undermined in my own house. 3 months in, my parents' behaviour crossed from annoying to intrusive. I discovered they had been using my master bathroom because they preferred the rainfall showerhead to the perfectly functional one in their bathroom. My father had reprogrammed all the channels on my TV to his preferences. My mother had moved my framed photos from the living room to make space for their family heirlooms. Jake began showing signs of stress. His teacher emailed me concerned about his sudden withdrawal in class. At home, he would go straight to his room after school rather than playing in the living room as he used to. One night, he confided that Grandpa had told him his Lego creations were making a mess and should be kept out of sight. I tried setting clearer boundaries. I created a chore chart dividing household responsibilities. I designated specific shelves in the refrigerator for different family members' food. I even drew up a schedule for the TV. My parents nodded and agreed, then promptly ignored everything we had discussed. Arguments became more frequent and heated. My father would bring up how much they had sacrificed for me, growing up conveniently forgetting that I had paid my own way through college. My mother would cry and ask why I was being so controlling, failing to see the irony in her accusation. "We're family, Kylie," she would say. "Why are you treating us like unwelcome guests?" I bit back the response that they were acting more like invasive squatters than guests. Instead, I reminded them gently that I had opened my home to help them through a difficult time, not to have my life taken over. This would lead to sulking silence for a day or two before the cycle began again. By the 6-month mark, I was at my breaking point. My home no longer felt like my sanctuary, but a battleground of passive-aggressive comments and territorial disputes. Jake had started asking to go to friends' houses more often, clearly seeking escape from the tension. I was staying later at the office, dreading the return home. What hurt the most was watching my parents interact with Jake. While they had initially shown interest in him, they now seemed to view him primarily as an extension of me and therefore subject to the same criticism. They questioned his homework routine, his bedtime, his choice of extracurricular activities. When Jake made honor roll that spring, my father's response was, "Let's see if he can maintain it," rather than congratulations. I began researching affordable senior apartments in the area and looking into financial assistance programs for which my parents might qualify. Whenever I tried to broach the subject of their future plans, they would change the subject or make vague comments about the housing market being too expensive. My father had half-heartedly applied for a few positions, but rejected others as beneath him. My mother had never worked outside the home and showed no interest in starting now, despite my suggestions that even a part-time job might help their situation. 8 months into this arrangement, I received news of a promotion at work. After years of dedication and late nights, I had been named lead developer on our company's newest project. It came with a significant pay increase and greater responsibility. In a moment of optimism, I decided to host a special family dinner to celebrate, hoping it might reset our increasingly dysfunctional dynamic. I spent the entire Saturday before my celebration dinner preparing. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just to share my good news, but to create a warm family moment that might help us remember why we were living together in the first place. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, even though my mother would likely find something I had missed. The menu was carefully planned to please everyone. Jake's favourite garlic butter salmon, my father's preferred roasted potatoes, and my mother's recipe for green bean casserole that she had taught me years ago. I even splurged on an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon that my father had once mentioned liking at a restaurant. Jake was my enthusiastic helper all day, setting the table with our best dishes and creating a special congratulations card for me. He had drawn a picture of me at a computer with a crown on my head, labelled Mum the Coding Queen. Looking at his proud smile as he coloured in the details, I felt a renewed determination to make our home happy again, for his sake if nothing else. "Do you think Grandpa and Grandma will be proud of you, Mom?" Jake asked as he carefully folded his homemade card. "I hope so, buddy," I answered, swallowing the knot in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know anymore what would make my parents proud. The goalpost had always seemed to move throughout my childhood, and that hadn't changed in adulthood. I scheduled dinner for 6 o'clock, making sure to remind my parents that morning about the special occasion. 6 o'clock came and went with no sign of them. Jake and I sat at the beautifully set table, the food getting cold, his excited smile gradually fading. At 6:30, the front door finally opened. My parents strolled in without a hint of apology for their tardiness. My father was already in a sour mood, complaining about the neighbour's dog barking as they walked up the driveway. "Sorry we're late," my mother said airily. "Your father wanted to finish watching his program." I bit my tongue and ushered them to the table, reheating the food as best I could in the microwave. Jake bounced in his seat, eager to share the news despite the delay dampening the mood. "Mum got a big promotion too," he blurted out as soon as my parents sat down. "She's going to be a team leader." "Lead developer," I corrected gently, serving my father his plate first as a peace offering. My father poked at the salmon with his fork. "It's overcooked now," he said, ignoring my announcement completely. "I had to reheat it," I explained, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "We were waiting for you." "You could have texted to say dinner was ready," my mother suggested, as if their tardiness had somehow been my fault. I took a deep breath and tried again. "Anyway, yes, I got the promotion I've been working toward. The project is really exciting and it comes with a nice raise too." My father grunted, taking a sip of the expensive wine without comment. "I suppose these tech companies throw money around pretty freely these days." The dismissal stung, but I persisted. Actually, the competition was pretty fierce. There were several senior developers in the running. "Well, computers always came easily to you," my mother said with a wave of her hand, as if my career success was merely the result of a natural aptitude rather than years of hard work and dedication. Jake, sensing the tension, tried to redirect. "Mum stayed up really late, lots of nights working on her project to get this job." "Is that why the house has been getting a bit neglected?" my mother asked, running a finger along the edge of the table as if checking for dust. I noticed the guest bathroom could use a good scrubbing. I felt my cheeks flush. "I've been balancing a lot of responsibilities lately." "That's the problem with your generation," my father interjected, helping himself to more potatoes. "You think you can have it all. Career, parenthood, nice house. Something always gives." "I think I'm managing pretty well," I said firmly, "and this promotion will make things even better for Jake and me. Your house is very modern," my mother commented, looking around with a slight grimace. "All this open concept living. In our day homes had proper walls, more privacy." The conversation was veering away from my achievement, as conversations with my parents often did. I tried once more. "The team I'll be leading is developing a healthcare application that could really help people. I'm excited about the impact we could make." My father scoffed. "Healthcare should be left to doctors, not computer programmers." "Technology is revolutionizing medicine, Dad," I countered. The app will help patients manage chronic conditions and communicate better with their healthcare providers. When I was your age, my father began a phrase that never preceded anything positive in my experience. I had already established a career that actually helped people. Insurance isn't glamorous, but it protected families when they needed it most. I bit back the retort that his insurance career hadn't protected our family when he lost his job. Instead, I said, different paths can lead to meaningful work. Jake, ever the peacemaker, despite his young age, piped up again. Grandpa, I made a model airplane yesterday. Do you want to see it after dinner? My father barely glanced at him. Not tonight, Jake. My back is bothering me. I watched my son's face fall and felt a familiar anger bubbling up. Jake had spent hours on that model specifically because he wanted to share something with his grandfather. It would only take a minute to look at it, I said. Jake worked really hard. Don't tell me what to do, Kylie, my father snapped. The boy needs to learn that adults have their own concerns. The boy has a name, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. And he deserves respect just like everyone else in this house. My mother jumped in with her usual peacekeeping attempt. Let's talk about something pleasant. Remember those family vacations we used to take to the lake house? Kylie wasn't that nice. I remembered those vacations very differently than she apparently did. I remembered my father complaining about the cost, my mother frantically cleaning the rental cabin to avoid his criticism, and me trying to stay out of the way as much as possible. Sure, Mom, I said, not wanting to argue about the past in front of Jake. My father, however, latched onto the new topic. We sacrificed a lot to give you those experiences, Kylie. Vacations, dance lessons, that expensive computer when you were in high school. Kids today don't appreciate what parents go through. I noticed he had nearly finished the bottle of wine. His face had that flushed look that usually preceded his worst moods. I do appreciate the good things from childhood, Dad, I said carefully, and I'm trying to provide good experiences for Jake too. With no father in the picture, my father muttered just loud enough to be heard. That was a low blow and he knew it. My divorce had been painful enough without my father's repeated insinuations that I had somehow failed by not staying in an unhappy marriage. Jake has a father who sees him regularly, I said evenly. And he has me. We're doing just fine. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jake pushed his food around his plate, clearly sensing the adult's tension. My mother busied herself with refolding her napkin repeatedly. My father poured the last of the wine into his glass. I decided to make one final attempt at steering the conversation toward future plans, rather than dwelling on the past or trading veiled insults. So I began trying to sound casual. With this promotion, I've been thinking about our living situation. Have you two given any thought to what your next steps might be? My father's hand froze midway to his mouth fork laden with roasted potato. His eyes, slightly glazed from the wine, narrowed dangerously. The dining room seemed to drop several degrees in temperature as he slowly lowered his fork back to the plate with a deliberate clink against the china. Our next steps, he repeated, his voice deceptively quiet. What exactly do you mean by that, Kylie? I knew I was treading on thin ice, but after months of tension and this dinner's steady deterioration, I couldn't back down. Jake was watching, and I needed to model healthy communication even when it was difficult. Well, I said, keeping my tone even, it's been 8 months since you moved in. I was wondering if you've made any progress on finding your own place or securing some income. My promotion means I could help you with a security deposit if that would help. My father's face flushed deeper, the colour spreading from his cheeks to his ears. My mother placed a warning hand on his arm, but he shook it off. The gesture was so familiar from my childhood, a precursor to one of his outbursts. So that's what this dinner is really about, he said, his voice rising. You get a little promotion and suddenly you're too good for your own parents, ready to toss us out on the street. That's not what I said at all, I protested. I'm just trying to have an adult conversation about future plans. Future plans. He mimicked, his tone turning nasty. Let me tell you about plans, Kylie. Your mother and I had plans too. Plans that didn't include losing everything at our age. Plans that didn't include being treated like burdens by our own daughter. Jake's eyes widened in alarm at his grandfather's tone. I gestured subtly for him to leave the table, but he seemed frozen in place, his child's mind trying to process the adult conflict unfolding before him. Dad, please lower your voice, I said quietly. This isn't a personal attack. I'm just trying to understand what you're thinking about the future. The future, he barked out a harsh laugh. Easy for you to talk about the future when you're riding high on your tech job. Some of us worked real jobs our whole lives only to be discarded. But you wouldn't understand loyalty or sacrifice, would you? Each word felt like a slap. After everything I had done after opening my home without hesitation when they needed help, this was how he saw me. My chest tightened with a familiar pain I hadn't felt since childhood, the ache of never being enough in his eyes. I think I understand sacrifice very well, I said, my voice wavering slightly. I've been supporting both Jake and myself for years, and now I'm supporting you and Mum too. That was the match that lit the powder keg. My father slammed his hand down on the table so hard the dishes rattled. Jake flinched, a small whimper escaping him. My mother's eyes were fixed on her plate, her shoulders hunched, as if trying to physically remove herself from the situation while remaining in her chair. Supporting us, my father shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He leaned forward, his face now inches from mine across the table. Spittle flew from his lips as he unleashed the words that would change everything. You and your kid are just freeloaders. The room seemed to freeze in that moment. Jake's fork clattered to his plate. My mother's head remained bowed, but a small, unmistakable smirk played at the corner of her mouth, a silent endorsement of my father's outrageous claim. I couldn't breathe. The absurdity of the accusation in my own home, the home I had purchased with my own money, the home where they lived rent-free, struck me with physical force. My ears rang as if I'd been struck. Freeloaders, he repeated, gaining momentum from my stunned silence. Living off my reputation. You think the neighbours don't talk? They know I was somebody. They know your mother and I came from good stock. We're the ones giving this place respectability. Jake burst into tears and bolted from the table, his small footsteps pounding up the stairs, followed by the slam of his bedroom door. The sound broke through my shock, replacing it with a slow, burning anger unlike anything I had felt before. My father was still ranting, emboldened by the wine and his own indignation. If it weren't for how we raised you, you wouldn't even have this house. You think you did this all yourself. Everything you have is because of the values we instilled in you. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. My heart raced painfully in my chest. A lifetime of similar moments flashed through my mind, my father shouting at me for getting a B+ instead of an A, his dismissal of my computer science scholarship as luck, his backhanded comments at my wedding, his absence after Jake was born until he heard Marcus had left. The pattern was so clear now. Nothing I achieved would ever be truly mine in his eyes. My success would always be attributed to him, while my struggles would be my own failures. The same dynamic was now threatening to shape Jake's understanding of his worth and accomplishments. In the silence after my father's outburst, the ticking of the kitchen clock seemed unnaturally loud. My mother finally looked up, her eyes darting between my father and me, as if watching a tennis match waiting to see who would serve next. Well, my father demanded, still standing over the table like a prosecutor awaiting a confession. Nothing to say for yourself. In that moment, something crystallized within me. I had spent my entire life seeking this man's approval, making myself smaller to accommodate his ego, tiptoeing around his fragile pride. And now he was doing the same to my son in my own home. The realization was like a door closing on my past and opening to a new future. I felt a strange calm settle over me, replacing the hurt and anger with clear-eyed resolve. I knew exactly what needed to be said, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to say it. This is my house, I said, my voice quiet but firm. This house that you're calling me a freeloader in, I paid for it with my money that I earned from my career that you dismissed. You live here rent-free because I showed you compassion when you had nowhere else to go. I stood up slowly, matching my father's posture. My hands had stopped shaking. Looking directly into his eyes, I continued. For 8 months, I've watched you take over my space, criticize my parenting, undermine my authority in front of my son, and contribute absolutely nothing financially or emotionally to this household. My father's mouth opened to interrupt, but I held up my hand. No, for once you're going to listen to me. This stops now, today. The surprise on his face might have been comical in another context. He clearly hadn't expected this response from me, the daughter who had always eventually backed down, always sought to keep the peace. Since you moved in, I continued, ticking points off on my fingers. You've rearranged my furniture without asking. You've used my master bathroom because you prefer my shower. You've changed the settings on my thermostat, answered my phone, criticized my groceries, my cooking, and my parenting. My mother finally spoke up, her voice small but defensive. "We were just trying to help Kylie. You're so busy with work." "Help would be contributing to groceries occasionally," I replied without looking away from my father. "Help would be respecting the boundaries I've tried to set. Help would be showing my son the same respect you demand for yourself." My father's face had turned from red to an alarming purple. "How dare you speak to us this way after everything we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me lately, Dad?" I asked. "Did you help with the mortgage this month? Did you cook dinner tonight? Did you even remember to congratulate me on my promotion?" "We gave you life," he sputtered. "We put a roof over your head for 18 years. That was your obligation as parents," I said. "Just like it's my obligation to provide for Jake. I don't expect him to spend his adult life repaying me for fulfilling my basic responsibilities." I took a deep breath, centering myself before continuing. "I'm not asking you to leave tonight. I understand that you need time to get back on your feet, but things are going to change if you want to continue living here." Without waiting for a response, I walked to my home office and retrieved a folder from my desk. Inside was my mortgage statement, bank records proving my down payment, and the deed to the house in my name only. I returned to the dining room and spread the documents on the table. "Here's the proof that this is my house bought with my money," I said, "and here's how things are going to work from now on." I outlined my terms clearly. They would need to contribute to household expenses based on their ability. They would respect my parenting decisions regarding Jake without question. They would ask permission before making any changes to my home. Most importantly, they would treat both Jake and me with respect at all times. "If you can't agree to these terms," I concluded, "I'll help you find another living arrangement. I've researched some affordable senior housing options that might work for your situation." The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at the mortgage documents, the reality of the situation seemingly sinking in for the first time. My mother looked torn between her habitual allegiance to my father and what appeared to be a dawning recognition of the precariousness of their position. I heard small footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Jake peering anxiously through the banister. The sight of his tear-stained face strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about breaking a generational cycle and showing my son what healthy boundaries looked like. "You've got some nerve," my father finally said, but his voice lacked its usual force. "After we've lowered ourselves to live in this starter home." "Dad," I said, suddenly feeling tired, "this isn't a starter home. This is my home, the home I'm proud of, the home I worked hard for, and Jake and I deserve to feel comfortable and respected in it." My father grabbed his phone from the table and stormed toward the front door. "I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by my own daughter. I'm going for a walk." The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. My mother sat frozen at the table, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Mum," I said gently, "I meant what I said. I don't want you and Dad to struggle. I want to help you get back on your feet, but this arrangement isn't working for anyone, especially not for Jake." She nodded almost imperceptibly, then stood up and began clearing the dishes as if on autopilot. It was her way of processing I knew from childhood. When conversations became too difficult, my mother retreated to household tasks. I went upstairs to find Jake sitting on his bed, hugging his knees to his chest. I sat beside him and pulled him close. "Is Grandpa mad at me?" he asked in a small voice. "No, buddy," I assured him. "Grandpa is dealing with his own feelings right now. It has nothing to do with you. But he called us freeloaders," Jake said, testing out the unfamiliar word. "What does that mean?" I chose my words carefully. "It means someone who takes advantage of others without giving anything back." But Grandpa was wrong to say that. "This is our house, and we belong here." "Are Grandma and Grandpa going to leave?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But I do know that whatever happens, you and I are going to be okay, and I'm going to make sure our home feels safe and happy again." Jake nodded against my shoulder. "You were really brave, Mom. You didn't yell like Grandpa, but you were strong." His words touched something deep within me. Despite the awfulness of the evening, my son had witnessed something important, that standing up for yourself doesn't require losing control, that boundaries can be set with firmness and dignity. "Sometimes being brave means speaking your truth even when it's hard," I told him, "even when the other person might be upset." As I tucked Jake into bed later that night, my father still hadn't returned from his walk. My mother had retreated to the guest bedroom without further discussion. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the tense silence I had grown accustomed to over the past months. Something had shifted. I had shifted. For the first time since my parents had moved in, I felt like I was truly the owner of my home again. Not just legally, but emotionally. Whatever happened next, I knew I would never again allow my worth to be diminished under my own roof. The week following what Jake would later call the dinner disaster was characterized by a heavy silence that hung over our house like a dense fog. My father returned late that night and wordlessly retreated to the guest bedroom. The next morning, he left before I was awake, a pattern that continued for days. My mother moved through the house like a ghost, speaking only when absolutely necessary, her eyes downcast as if afraid to make contact. Jake watched it all with the heightened awareness children often possess during family conflict. Despite my efforts to maintain normalcy for him, he stuck close to my side whenever we were home, as if providing silent support or seeking protection. By Wednesday, I knew I needed professional guidance. I contacted a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and scheduled an emergency session during my lunch break. Dr. Harriet Parker listened intently as I unloaded the history of my relationship with my parents and the current crisis we were facing. What you're describing is a classic power struggle, she explained. Your parents are facing a major life transition with the loss of their home and your father's job. They're attempting to regain control by dominating your household. So what do? I asked. I can't keep living like this, and it's affecting Jake. You've already taken the most important step by setting clear boundaries, Dr. Parker assured me. Now you need to formalize those expectations and be consistent in enforcing them. Following her advice, I spent that evening drafting a formal household agreement while Jake was at his weekly swim lesson. The document outlined specific expectations, financial contributions based on their ability, even a token amount would establish the principle, respect for house rules, appropriate interaction with Jake, and a timeline for finding alternative housing. Dr. Parker had emphasized that having an end date, even if flexible, was crucial to preventing the temporary arrangement from becoming permanent by default. When I presented the agreement to my parents the following evening, their reactions were predictably different, but equally challenging. My father refused to even look at the document, dismissing it as ridiculous corporate nonsense. My mother skimmed it with nervous glances toward my father, clearly unwilling to take a position independent of his. This isn't negotiable, I explained calmly. I'm not asking you to sign it tonight, but we need to have some written understanding if you're going to continue staying here. So now we need a contract to live with our own daughter, my father scoffed. What next? Timesheets for bathroom usage? Dad, this isn't about punishing you, I said, maintaining the even tone I had practiced with Dr. Parker. It's about creating clear expectations so we can all live together respectfully for the time being. My father's strategy shifted from outright refusal to a more familiar tactic, rallying the extended family against me. Over the next few days, I received concerned calls from relatives who had heard highly edited versions of our conflict. My Aunt Helen suggested I was being harsh with my parents in their time of need. My cousin Michael reminded me that family should stick together. The most surprising call came from my father's sister, Aunt Sandra, whom I had always viewed as firmly in his corner. Instead of the criticism I expected, she asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to my perspective. Your father has always been difficult, she acknowledged, surprising me with her candor. After your grandparents died, he expected to inherit their entire estate despite having 3 siblings. He hasn't spoken to my brother James in 15 years over that dispute. Her insight into my father's pattern of entitlement was both validating and saddening. I don't want to cut them off, I confessed to her. I just need my home to feel like mine again. You're doing the right thing, Kylie, Aunt Sandra assured me. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for difficult people is to set clear boundaries. It might be the only way they can have relationships at all. Bolstered by this unexpected support, I held firm on the household agreement. The turning point came unexpectedly through my mother, who knocked tentatively on my home office door one evening while my father was out and Jake was engrossed in a movie downstairs. Can we talk? She asked, her voice smaller than I could ever remember hearing it. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, setting aside my laptop to give her my full attention. She sat perched on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. I've been thinking about your agreement, she began hesitantly. Your father is very upset about it. I understand that, I replied, but I need to do what's best for Jake and me. He's afraid, she blurted out, then looked shocked at her own admission. We both are. We never planned to end up like this at our age. Your father always handled everything, and now..." Her voice trailed off, but I understood what she couldn't say. My father's identity had been built around being the provider, the decision-maker, the authority. His financial failure had shattered that self-image, and my success only highlighted his sense of diminishment. "I'm not trying to humiliate you or Dad," I said gently. "But I can't let Jake grow up in a home filled with tension and disrespect." "I know," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I see how it affects him. It's like watching history repeat itself." She looked up suddenly, her eyes clear and direct, for perhaps the first time in our conversation. "You were always walking on eggshells around your father, just like Jake is doing now." The acknowledgement struck me deeply. My mother had never before admitted, even obliquely, that my childhood had been shaped by my father's volatile temperament. "Help me understand what you're afraid of, Mom," I encouraged her. "Everything," she admitted. "Being homeless, being a burden, growing old without security." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "And losing you and Jake, after everything that might be what scares me most." The vulnerability in her confession created a small opening between us, a glimpse of the mother I had always wished for, but rarely experienced. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night, exploring fears and hopes with an honesty that felt new and fragile. By the end of our conversation, my mother agreed to sign the household agreement and to speak with my father about attending at least one family counselling session. I didn't expect miracles, but it was more progress than we had made in years. The first counselling session with Dr. Parker was every bit as awkward as I had anticipated. My father sat with arms crossed, answering questions with minimal words. My mother alternated between nervous chatter and apologetic silence. I fought the familiar urge to smooth things over, to accept less than I deserved for the sake of harmony. Dr. Parker, however, was unfazed by the resistance. She calmly noted that our current difficulties reflected patterns established decades ago, patterns that had served their purpose once, but now created suffering for everyone involved. "Families develop certain dances," she explained. "Everyone knows their steps. What we're trying to do is choreograph a new dance, one where everyone feels valued and heard." To my surprise, my father returned for a second session and then a third. The discussions were never easy, often painful, but slowly a more honest picture of our family emerged. Dr. Parker helped us see how my grandfather's authoritarian parenting had shaped my father, how my mother's childhood in a home broken by alcoholism had made her fear confrontation above all else. Understanding didn't excuse their behavior, but it helped me separate the wounded people they were from the confident, respected adults I had once imagined them to be. They were flawed humans doing the best they could with limited emotional tools, just as I was. Parallel to our therapeutic work, I helped my parents take practical steps toward independence. I researched job opportunities appropriate for their age and skills. My father initially resisted, but when a former colleague offered him a part-time consulting position, his relief was palpable. The role was less prestigious than his former executive position, but it provided structure and a modest income that helped restore some of his dignity. My mother, to everyone's surprise, including her own, secured a position as a receptionist at a local dental office 3 days a week. Having never worked outside the home, she was terrified at first, but the simple routine and social interaction seemed to awaken something long dormant in her. She began to express opinions separate from my father's small assertions of independence that would have been unimaginable months earlier. With their combined income, an affordable senior apartment became a realistic goal. I spent weekends driving them to view different complexes, encouraging them to imagine a new chapter rather than mourning what was lost. A garden-level unit in a well-maintained building about 20 minutes from my house eventually emerged as the leading contender. It was smaller than their previous home, but offered a community of peers and amenities designed for their stage of life. Throughout this transition, Jake observed and adjusted. The tension in our house gradually dissipated, and he began to spend more time in common areas again. He developed a new routine with my mother, helping her practice computer skills for her job while she taught him to bake cookies from scratch. My father remained more distant, but made occasional efforts asking about Jake's school projects or offering to watch his soccer practice. 3 months after the dinner disaster, my parents moved into their new apartment. The day was bittersweet, filled with the practical chaos of any move, but underlaid with the emotional significance of this new arrangement. Jake insisted on decorating a welcome sign for their door, a gesture that brought tears to my mother's eyes. As we unloaded the last boxes from my car, I experienced a complex mix of emotions: relief, at reclaiming my space pride and navigating a difficult situation, concern for my parents' adjustment, and hope for our future relationship. Standing in their new living room, surrounded by familiar furniture in an unfamiliar configuration, I realized we had all been transformed by the crucible of the past year. "It's small," my father commented, looking around the apartment with an unreadable expression. "But it's yours," I replied. "Your fresh start." For once, he didn't argue. 6 months after my parents moved into their apartment, our family dynamics had shifted in ways I could never have predicted during those tense days under one roof. The distance created by separate living spaces allowed for something new to develop a relationship based on choice, rather than obligation or proximity. We established a tradition of Sunday dinners at a neutral location, a family-friendly restaurant equidistant between our homes. Meeting on neutral ground eliminated the territorial disputes that had characterized their time in my house and provided a built-in time limit for our interactions. Jake looked forward to these weekly gatherings, especially since they usually concluded with a visit to the ice cream shop next door. My father's part-time consulting work had expanded slightly, providing him with not just income, but a renewed sense of purpose. While he remained proud and occasionally difficult, the desperate edge that had fueled his worst behavior had noticeably softened. He had even begun mentoring a young professional at his firm, channeling his experience into guidance rather than criticism. My mother's transformation was even more remarkable. Her receptionist position had introduced her to a social circle independent of my father for the first time in their 40-year marriage. She joined a book club with several co-workers and occasionally met them for lunch on weekends. These small steps toward autonomy changed something fundamental in her demeanor. She stood straighter, spoke more confidently, and even disagreed with my father occasionally, without the anxious deference that had once characterized their interaction. Jake's relationship with his grandparents improved dramatically once clear boundaries were established. Without the constant undercurrent of tension, he could enjoy their company on limited structured terms. My father taught him chess, displaying unexpected patience with Jake's learning process. My mother took him to a children's theatre production, something she would never have done without my father's approval in the past. My own healing journey progressed in fits and starts. I continued regular sessions with Dr. Parker, unpacking the complexities of my childhood and examining how they had shaped my adult relationships. I joined a support group for adult children of difficult parents, finding solace and wisdom in the stories of others who understood the unique challenges of loving family members who had caused significant pain. "You can love someone and still need protection from their behavior" became a mantra I repeated to myself during difficult moments. With my home fully mine again, I reconnected with friends I had unconsciously distanced during the family crisis. My college roommate Kate visited for a weekend, filling the house with laughter and reminding me who I had been before the weight of family obligation had settled so heavily on my shoulders. I resumed monthly dinner gatherings with colleagues, no longer afraid of what chaos might await me at home. Jake thrived in the renewed atmosphere of peace and stability. His teacher noted improvement in his focus at school, and his natural exuberance, somewhat dampened during my parents' residence, returned in full force. He made the soccer team, began taking guitar lessons, and developed a passionate interest in marine biology after a school field trip to the aquarium. Most importantly, our home became a sanctuary again, rather than a battleground. We established new traditions: movie nights with homemade popcorn on Fridays, pancake breakfasts on Sundays before visiting my parents, a special handshake we exchanged each night at bedtime. These small rituals created a sense of security and joy that had been missing during those difficult months. The healing extended to our physical space as well. I repainted the guest bedroom that had been my parents' domain, transforming it into a combined craft room and reading nook. Jake helped choose the color, a peaceful sage green that held no traces of the tension that had permeated that space. We hung new artwork, rearranged furniture, and sage-smudged the house in a symbolic cleansing that felt surprisingly therapeutic. As autumn arrived, bringing the 1-year anniversary of my parents' financial crisis and subsequent move to my home, I suggested hosting Thanksgiving dinner at my house. The proposal was met with mixed reactions from all parties, including my own internal voice of caution. "Are you sure, Mum?" Jake asked when I discussed the idea with him, first seeking his comfort level before extending the invitation. "I think we're all in a different place now," I explained. "But if you're not comfortable with it, we can stick with our restaurant meetings." Jake considered this seriously. "I think it could be okay," he decided. "Grandpa doesn't yell as much anymore, and Grandma seems happier." The simple truth of his observation confirmed my own assessment. We had all changed, perhaps my parents most of all, as they adjusted to their new circumstances. When I extended the invitation during our next Sunday dinner, my mother immediately accepted while my father looked uncertain. "We won't stay late," I assured them. "Just the traditional meal and maybe some board games afterward if everyone's up for it. Aunt Sandra will be joining us too." The mention of his sister, who had become a surprising ally in my boundary-setting journey, seemed to settle something for my father. He nodded his agreement, and the plan was set. Thanksgiving Day arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather, which I took as a good omen. I had prepared much of the meal in advance, determined to enjoy the day rather than exhaust myself with last-minute cooking. Jake had decorated the table with handmade place cards and a centerpiece of pine cones and autumn leaves collected from our backyard. When my parents arrived, my mother brought a pumpkin pie from the bakery near their apartment. My father carried a bottle of sparkling cider rather than wine, a thoughtful acknowledgement of the tension alcohol had contributed to our previous family dinner. These small considerations reflected the incremental progress we had made over the past year. Aunt Sandra arrived shortly after, bringing warmth and a buffer of extended family energy that helped ease any lingering awkwardness. The meal progressed pleasantly, with conversation flowing more naturally than I had dared to hope. Jake proudly shared stories from school, my mother asked questions about my latest project at work with genuine interest, and even my father engaged without his former defensiveness. As we finished the main course, my father cleared his throat in a way that instantly transported me back to childhood dinner tables. The familiar sound triggered a momentary tension in my shoulders, a physical memory of bracing for criticism or conflict. "I'd like to say something," he announced, his voice gruff but not angry. The table fell silent. Jake looked at me with slight alarm, and I gave him what I hoped was a reassuring smile, despite my own uncertainty about what would follow. My father took a deep breath. "This past year has been difficult. For all of us. I never imagined I'd find myself in this position at my age." He paused, seeming to struggle with what came next. "I said things, particularly at our last dinner in this house, that were unfair and untrue." My mother reached over and placed her hand on his, a gesture of support I had rarely witnessed flowing in that direction. "You and Jake are not freeloaders," my father continued, looking directly at me for the first time. "This is your home that you earned through your own hard work. And you showed generosity when we needed it most, even though I haven't always been the father you deserved." The admission, partial and imperfect as it was, represented more vulnerability than I had ever witnessed from him. I felt tears threatening, but held them back, not wanting to derail this moment with emotion that might make him retreat. "Thank you, Dad," I said simply. "That means a lot to me." Jake, less constrained by adult caution, jumped up and hugged his grandfather impulsively. After a startled moment, my father patted his back awkwardly, the closest approximation to affection he could manage. Progress came in small steps, not dramatic transformations. As we shared dessert, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The crisis that had begun with my parents losing their home had ultimately led to all of us finding something more valuable, healthier relationships, built on honesty rather than obligation, respect rather than fear. The path had been painful, littered with difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths, but the destination made the struggle worthwhile. That evening, after my parents and aunt had left, and Jake was asleep upstairs, I sat in my peaceful living room and wrote in the journal Dr. Parker had encouraged me to keep. I reflected on the lesson that had emerged most clearly from our family's upheaval. Standing your ground doesn't mean losing your heart. It's possible to maintain boundaries while still offering compassion to protect yourself and your child, while still extending care to those who have hurt you. The house around me felt different than it had a year ago, imbued now with the confidence that came from having defended it as my own territory. More importantly, I felt different, stronger, clearer, more certain of my worth as a parent, a daughter, and a person deserving of respect. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family members living in your home? How did you navigate those difficult conversations while maintaining relationships? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join our community of healing and growth. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone in your life. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to create the peaceful home you deserve.